This is Mrs. Naslin, and today we'll be doing Unit 2, Lesson 3, Kinds of Quadrilaterals. Our learning objectives are, I can recognize and apply characteristics of different types of quadrilaterals. The vocab we'll be talking about is quadrilateral, trapezoid, isosceles trapezoid, parallelogram, rhombus, rectangle, and square. So we're going to start by reading this problem. It says, describe four-sided figures. Says Jose has a new puppy named Daisy. He needs to build a four-sided dog pen in his yard for her. He wants us to help him plan or help us plan a pen for Daisy. Which of the figures could be Daisy's pen? So we're trying to see if all of these figures have four sides. So go ahead and take a look and see what you think. Do all of these sides or figures have four sides? Yes or no? If you said yes, right on. All of these figures do have four sides. Now, some of them are a little strange, but they all have four sides. Now, which of these pens would Daisy probably like the most? I would say she probably would like A, H, I, and L probably the most because it gives her the most amount of space. Okay? Now, the last question we're going to ask is, how could we group these figures? What are some things we could say to group these figures? All right, well, one way we could group them is trying to find all of the figures that have parallel sides. So again, parallel means they have lines that will never meet. So in this case, this line and this line will never meet, or this line and this line will never meet. So A has parallel sides. So does B, so does H, so does F. So there's a lot of examples in here that have parallel sides. We could also say the ones that have no parallel sides, so ones that do not have any parallel lines. An example of that would be like K. Eventually all of these lines would meet. We could also look and maybe group them by congruent sides. Remember, congruent means exactly the same length and same size. So, for example, H. This line is exactly the same length and size as this line. C would be another example. This line is exactly the same length as this line. So we could say they have congruent sides. Another option would be non-congruent sides, where none of the sides are equal to each other. An example of that would be like D. None of these are the same length of each other, so they're non-congruent sides. We could also group by if it has perpendicular angles in it. So for example, if we can fit that 90-degree angle, that corner of your sheet of paper, we'd say it has perpendicular angles. So we could do A, do H, okay? We could do M, so ones that have perpendicular angles. So there's many different ways that we can group figures, and we're going to use that idea as we start learning some of the names of different figures. Now, when we're learning these names, I would recommend that you take out a sheet of paper or your math notebook and you take some notes. You can always pause the video and write some of these things down, because ultimately you do have to memorize these different names and be able to recognize these different shapes. And this continues to come up over and over as we continue in fourth grade. So again, writing this down is really important just to help you remember it. So, first thing we're going to talk about is quadrilaterals. The prefix quad, so the beginning of the word quad right there, means four. The suffix lateral, so the end of this word, means sides. So quadrilateral literally means four-sided. Okay, so all figures that have four sides, no matter what their shape, are considered quadrilaterals. Now, in this discussion, the four-sided shape does have to be closed. So if I had a figure like this, has four sides, but it's not closed, then it's not a quadrilateral. All quadrilaterals close. So I just wanted to point that out. They're four-sided shapes that are closed. So if we look at this next one here, it says, why are all these figures called quadrilaterals? Well, if you look at them all, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, they all have 4 sides and they're all closed, so they are quadrilaterals. Okay? Now, we're going to talk about all of these other types of shapes, and I'm going to give you definitions that explain why they are what they are. So the first one we're going to talk about is trapezoids. Now, trapezoids have exactly one pair of parallel opposite sides. So remember we talked about parallel lines that never meet? They have exactly one set of them. So this line is parallel to this line, and this line in this case is parallel to this line. These two other lines on both of these are not parallel, okay? So that's what makes it a trapezoid. They have one set of parallel opposite on the opposite sides of each other, okay? Now, an isosceles triangle has two parallel sides and one pair of congruent sides. So remember, they have two parallel sides, so this is parallel to this line, okay? And one pair of congruent sides. Congruent means exactly the same length. So this line and this line are congruent to each other. They're exactly the same length. So that makes it an isosceles trapezoid. All right. Next, we're going to talk about parallelograms. Now, parallelograms have opposite sides parallel and congruent. So if you look at this, the opposite sides are parallel. They'll never hit in both ways. So this line and this line will never hit, and this line and this line will never hit on all of these shapes. Okay? And they're congruent. So the opposite sides are the same length of each other. So these two lines are the same length, and these two lines are the same length. In the rectangle, these two lines are the same length, and these two lines are the same length. Okay? All right. Next is a rhombus. And a rhombus, the definition is, has four congruent sides, and opposite sides are parallel. Okay, so here's our two examples of rhombuses. They have four congruent sides, meaning all the sides are the same length, and the opposite sides are parallel. So this line is parallel to this line, and this line is parallel to this line. Okay. Rectangles, the definition of a rectangle, opposite sides are parallel and congruent, and they have four right angles. So opposite sides are parallel, they'll never hit. They are congruent, so opposite sides are the same length, and they form four right angles. Remember, you could take a sheet of paper and stick the corner in it, and it would be perfect fit. So a rectangle and a square fit into those, fit into the rectangle classification. Lastly, a square. A square has opposite sides are parallel, has four congruent sides, and it has four right angles. So you'll see it's different than a rectangle because all the sides are congruent and equal to each other. So we went through all of the different types of quadrilaterals, and I want you to notice that many of the quadrilaterals fit into different categories. So for example, the square is a parallelogram, a rhombus, a rectangle, and a square. The rectangle is a parallelogram and a rectangle. So a lot of times quadrilaterals will fit into different categories. All right. Question number 7, it says, why are there several quadrilaterals in the same row in exercise 6? And we kind of answered that, but basically they all fit into those different definitions, and that's why they're listed there. All right, well that concludes our lesson for today. Again, it's a lot of vocabulary. I would recommend, if you haven't already, take some notes, especially on these definitions here, because that will really help you internalize them and remember them. And you'll probably need to refer back to this page when you're working on your homework and remembering today.